Have you ever had a moment with your kids, whether they're in their 20s, 40s, or even older, where you felt like no matter what you said, it didn't seem to reach them? You try to offer advice, comfort, or wisdom, and somehow it just bounces off. Maybe they roll their eyes, change the subject, or shut down. You walk away wondering, was I too much or not enough? Let me tell you something you may not hear often. It's not always what you say that makes the difference. Sometimes it's what you don't say. Sometimes the greatest shift in your relationship, especially with adult children, comes from silence. Not silence that's cold or punishing. I'm not talking about giving the silent treatment. I'm talking about the kind of silence that speaks louder than lectures ever could. A calm, steady silence that signals something's changed, not out of anger, but out of wisdom. Because you've realized that chasing, explaining, and fixing doesn't work the way it used to. And more importantly, you don't need to anymore. As we age, we gain something incredibly powerful: perspective. We begin to see through the noise, the games, the guilt trips. We learn that trying to control everything, especially the people we love most, is not only exhausting, it's ineffective. And for many of us, the hardest lesson is letting go of that illusion of control. Maybe you spent years trying to guide your children, even when they didn't want to be guided. Maybe you bailed them out one too many times. Maybe you warned them about choices they were making, and they ignored you, only to come back later with regrets. Or maybe you've tried to keep the peace in a family that doesn't always treat you with the respect you deserve. That's where silence comes in, not as a punishment, but as a boundary. A gentle but firm declaration that says, I love you, but I won't keep chasing your approval. I'm here, but I'm not your emotional cushion anymore. I've done my part. Now it's your turn to grow. And here's the thing. When you stop speaking, something unexpected happens. The kids, especially the ones who were used to you always being there, always responding, always smoothing things over, they start to feel it. That silence, that space, it shakes them, because it breaks their sense of certainty. Suddenly the roles have shifted. They used to count on you to always be the one to fix things, to apologize first, to explain away the discomfort. But now, there's nothing. No long texts, no guilt-ridden phone calls, no justifications, just quiet. And that quiet becomes deafening. At first, they may brush it off. They might think you're just giving them space. But over time, they start to question it. They start to replay the last thing they said. They wonder if maybe they went too far. They ask themselves, why haven't they called? Why didn't they answer? And without realizing it, their confidence, so firm just days before, starts to turn into doubt. Not because you yelled, not because you shamed them, but because you chose not to engage. You see, silence has a way of creating space. And in that space, people have to sit with themselves, with their choices, with the way they've treated you. That's something words often can't accomplish, because when we speak, people defend. But when we're quiet, they reflect. I know this isn't easy. For most parents, especially those of us who've lived long enough to see the highs and lows of life, being silent can feel unnatural. We want to help, we want to fix, we want to protect. And many of us were raised in generations where communication was the way to show love. But now, we're learning that emotional discipline is a form of love, too. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for your kids is to stop trying to carry them through every storm. Let them walk their own path. Let them feel the weight of their own decisions. That's not cruelty. That's maturity. That's parenting at its highest level. Because here's the truth. When your kids are so used to you reacting, they rely on that reaction to measure their worth. If you argue, they know you're still engaged. If you chase, they know they still matter. But when you stop reacting, not in anger, but in calm self-respect, it forces them to face a very uncomfortable question. Have I pushed too far? Have I taken this relationship for granted? And in that moment, the power dynamic shifts. You're no longer the one trying to prove yourself. You're no longer the one handing over your peace, just to keep the connection alive. You've stepped back. You've reclaimed your power. And they can feel it. They may not say it right away. They may not even understand it consciously. But somewhere inside, the balance has changed. The parent who once gave too much is now giving less, but not out of bitterness, out of clarity, out of strength, out of love for yourself. This is when respect starts to grow. Slowly, quietly, but steadily. They may not admit it. They may even push harder at first, testing to see if the old version of you is still there. But if you remain grounded, if you stay silent and focused on your own peace, something shifts in their mind. They begin to see you not as someone they can push or guilt, but as someone who holds their ground. And in a world full of noise, that kind of calm presence is rare and valuable. You are no longer reacting to their drama. You are no longer proving your love with endless explanations. You are standing in quiet dignity, saying, "I know my worth. I don't need to raise my voice to prove it." And here's the beautiful part. The more you stay silent, the more they have to face themselves. Without your words as a distraction, they're left with their own behavior, their own patterns, their own guilt. It's like holding up a mirror, but without lifting a finger. They begin to feel what you've been carrying all along, and they may not thank you. They may not even say sorry, but they'll know. Deep down, they'll know. Because silence doesn't lie. Silence doesn't manipulate. Silence doesn't beg. Silence simply is. And it's in that silence where you rediscover yourself. You remember the version of you before the guilt, before the pressure, before the endless cycle of fixing and giving. You remember that your time, your energy, your peace are sacred. You don't owe anyone your constant presence, not even your children, especially if they've stopped valuing it. What you owe to them and to yourself is truth, integrity. And sometimes that truth is best delivered not with words, but with stillness. They thought they knew you. For years, they counted on your reactions, your comfort, your words that always came when they pushed hard enough. And maybe, for a long time, you gave them exactly that. Not because you were weak, but because you loved them. Because that's what parents do. We show up. We speak up. We try to smooth out the rough edges. But now, you've discovered something more powerful than explaining yourself. More powerful than raising your voice or repeating the same truths over and over again. You've discovered that your quiet, your decision to say nothing, can say everything. And this shift doesn't just rattle their confidence. It reorders the entire balance of your relationship. Suddenly, they're not the ones being chased. They're the ones left wondering. Every message they send that goes unanswered, every call that you don't return right away, becomes a moment they question themselves. They start asking, why isn't mom calling back? Why didn't dad say anything? And in those questions, the confidence they used to carry begins to slip. Because now, there's no clear script. There's no predictable reaction. You're no longer playing the role they cast you in, and that throws everything off. But here's the beautiful part. This isn't about control. It's not about punishing them or playing games. It's about respect, real, deep, mutual respect. And that kind of respect doesn't come from shouting louder or trying harder. It comes from stillness, from showing them with your actions, not your arguments, that you are no longer available for the same old patterns. And the truth is, people can fight words. They can twist them, argue with them, dismiss them. But they can't fight what you don't say. That's why silence holds so much power. When you stop responding, stop reacting, stop trying to defend your every choice as a parent, there's nothing left for them to push against. They're left with only their own reflection. And often, that reflection is uncomfortable. You see, your silence forces them to sit with themselves, with their actions, with the things they've said and the way they've behaved. They don't have you filling the space anymore, trying to fix it. And in that emptiness, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Maybe they're remembering the time they snapped at you for offering help. or the times they ghosted you for weeks, only to call when they needed something. Maybe they're realizing just how much they've relied on your emotional labor, your presence, your patience, and took it for granted. Without you stepping in, without you softening the blow, they feel the full weight of their own choices. And it stings. But here's the thing. That sting, it's necessary. It's the beginning of growth. Sometimes your silence is the only thing that gives someone a chance to really face themselves. When we talk too much, when we over-explain or over-help, we often end up shielding others from the consequences they need to feel. We unintentionally protect them from the very discomfort that would make them grow up, step up, and take responsibility. But when you step back, calmly, peacefully, without resentment, you create the space for that inner work to begin. This is where the shift in power becomes most clear. You're not holding grudges. You're not trying to win. You're not withdrawing out of spite. You're simply done handing over your peace to people who haven't learned how to handle it with care. That quiet strength, that centered silence, it commands attention. And whether they admit it or not, your kids start to see you in a new light. You're no longer the parent who's always available, always bending, always swallowing your own needs for the sake of theirs. You've become someone they can't quite figure out anymore. And in that mystery, a seed of respect begins to take root. Because the truth is, people respect what they can't control. They respect boundaries they can't cross. They respect individuals who don't fold under pressure, who hold their ground not by force, but by presence. And your presence, even in silence, is powerful. You may not see it right away. They may not say it out loud. But slowly, their tone changes. They become more careful with their words. They reach out, not just to vent or complain, but to connect. They start asking questions they never asked before. How are you really doing? Is there anything I can help with? Why? Because they're realizing something they never had to think about before. You don't need them the way they assumed you did. And that realization, that you've reclaimed your time, your energy, your emotional space, is both humbling and inspiring. They begin to see you not as someone clinging to a role, but as someone who has evolved. You've shifted from being the fixer to being the foundation. Quiet, solid, unshakable. You don't chase. You don't correct. You don't demand. You simply live your truth and let that speak for itself. And that's when the fear starts to creep in. Not the kind of fear that damages, but the kind that awakens. The kind that whispers, I may lose something important if I don't change. They may not call it fear, but it's there, in the hesitation before they text you, in the pause before they speak, in the new care they take when they show up. It's not because you threatened them. It's because they feel the shift. They see that something sacred has changed. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just done with the old ways. And that alone is enough to shake them. Now maybe part of you worries, but what if I lose them completely? And that's a valid fear, because silence can bring distance. It can open the door to the unknown. But here's the truth. If the only way to keep someone in your life is to keep lowering your value, then what are you really holding on to? What kind of relationship is that, where your presence is expected, but your peace is optional? Choosing silence doesn't mean you've stopped loving them. It means you've started loving yourself just as much. And the more you stand in that love, the more the right people, yes, even your children, begin to rise to meet you. Maybe not right away, maybe not in the way you hoped. But over time, your calm presence starts to teach them more than your words ever could. Because silence, when rooted in love and self-respect, doesn't just change others. It transforms you. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop needing validation. You stop measuring your worth by how often the phone rings or how quickly they reply. You begin to walk differently. You make choices that nourish you. You create space for joy, for healing, for rediscovering parts of yourself that got lost in all the giving. And that space, That's where the real beauty begins. Sometimes the biggest breakthrough isn't in what you say, but in what you stop saying. And as time goes on, you realize that the most powerful thing you can offer isn't advice or even presence, it's an example. Because when your kids see you at peace without needing their approval, when they see you thriving without chasing their affection, it starts to change something inside them. It challenges what they thought they knew about you, about themselves, about what love and respect really mean. And here's the part they may never admit, but deep down, they know it's true. Your silence was never about punishing them. It was about protecting yourself. It was about creating space to breathe again, to live again. That silence, in its purest form, is a declaration of self-worth. You're not walking away. You're not giving up on them. You're simply saying, I matter too. You're saying, my peace is not a negotiation. You're saying, I will no longer shrink myself to keep the connection alive. And that message, even without words, echoes louder than anything you've ever said. It echoes in the way you no longer respond immediately to chaos. It echoes in the way you no longer rush in to fix things that aren't yours to fix. It echoes in the way you wake up with a clearer mind, a lighter heart, and a steadier voice, because you're no longer carrying everyone else's burdens. It doesn't mean you've stopped loving. It means you've stopped overgiving. And now, in that space of quiet strength, you start to rise. Not above them, not away from them, but into yourself. You begin to rediscover the joys you once put aside, the hobbies, the books, the friends, the simple pleasures that bring you back to life. You start saying yes to yourself more often. You find yourself smiling at things that have nothing to do with family or obligation. That's not selfish. That's healthy. That's necessary. You spent decades being the foundation for others. Now, it's time to be the foundation for you. And something beautiful happens when you do. The energy shifts. The tone of your relationships begins to change, not through confrontation, but through alignment. The ones who truly care will feel it, and some of them will rise too. Maybe your son starts calling, not just to vent, but to ask how you're doing. Maybe your daughter stops taking your silence as distance and starts recognizing it as strength. Maybe they don't say it, but they begin to respect the way you've drawn a line, not to keep them out, but to keep yourself whole. And yes, some may not get it. Some may push harder. Some may fall away. That's okay, because your goal isn't to be liked, it's to be well. It's to live the years ahead with peace in your heart and clarity in your mind. You've earned that. You've survived heartbreaks, setbacks, betrayals. You've weathered storms that would have broken others. You've poured your love into people who didn't always pour it back. And now, finally, you're learning to pour that love into yourself. That is not weakness. That is power. And the best part? That power can't be taken away, because it doesn't come from outside approval. It doesn't come from whether your kids call you today or wait another week. It comes from within. You've chosen yourself, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You've chosen quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You've chosen stillness, not to make others uncomfortable, but to make yourself whole again. And in doing so, you've set a new standard, not just for how others treat you, but for how you treat you. That standard is unshakable. You are not here to prove your worth. You are not here to earn your place. You are already worthy. You are already whole. Your silence is the proof. So the next time the urge rises to explain, to chase, to fill the silence with words just to make someone else feel better, pause. Ask yourself, will this bring me closer to peace or pull me away from it? And if it pulls you away, choose silence. Choose calm. Choose you. Because the truth is, at this stage of life, your energy is too precious. Your time is too valuable. Your presence is a gift, and it should only be given where it's respected, not expected. You have every right to protect your peace, to set your boundaries, and to walk your path with quiet confidence. You've come this far not by chance, but by strength, by wisdom, by learning what matters most. And what matters most now is your inner peace, not the noise of what others think, not the pressure to be who you used to be, not the fear of disappointing people who never truly saw you. What matters is living a life that feels honest, balanced, and deeply your own. So if your silence has caused your kids to pause, to reflect, to even fear what it means, that's okay. It means they're finally paying attention, not just to your words, but to your worth. And if they don't say it, I will. You are not too quiet. You are not too distant. You are not too much or too little. You are enough. And you deserve a life that reflects that. If this message spoke to you, I want to hear from you in the comments. You're not alone. Many parents feel this same shift, the need to step back, not to disappear, but to become whole again. And if you want more encouragement, more real conversations like this, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We're here to support you, to remind you that your best years aren't behind you, they're ahead. Here's to quiet strength, to calm confidence, to finally living life on your terms. Here's to you.